Everybody, welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. This is your DC Spotlight for May 30th, 2023. I say this a lot of times. I'll remind everybody once again, when there's a fifth Tuesday for DC, fifth Wednesday for regular books, whatever, it happens 4 times a year. Those are often lighter weeks. Publishers, at least the big two, often use it as a week to get caught up on books that are a little bit late, that have been running late. Or a lot of times they'll put specials or annuals. So no exception this week. We have DC Pride 2023, which I think it's 80 pages of story / pinups or so. I mean, our press preview is 100 pages, but there's multiple covers and what have you. There's also a foreword from Phil Jiminez. It was very heartfelt. And then there are some, I guess you'd say, retrospectives on the life of Rachel Pollack, who was an artist for many, many years. She was in her 70s. I think she was 77. She passed away. She was active in the Pride community, so there's a lot of remembrances in the back that talk about her impact and her life and what have you. So it kind of swelled the issue, but it's very, very good. I think in the past we've done a separate DC Pride episode because it's so big. There's so many stories. Since there's only 3 other books we're going to talk about, we'll probably cover them all here. We may not touch on every story. Also, Detective Comics, I guess it's just running a little late, is also out this week. And then we've got Powergirl Special, which is more than 20 pages. And then the Icon versus Hardware, issue 3, which is also more than 20 pages. So even though there's fewer books this week, it felt like somewhat of a big week in a lot of ways. So, excuse me. I thought overall it was a pretty solid week, though. I enjoyed DC Pride. Detective Comics is kind of the best issue of that. It's been around a while. Power Girl sort of had its ups and downs for me. I have mixed feelings about that. And then Icon and Hardware probably lands somewhere in the middle. So overall, a solid week. The biggest thing I take away is like, what? May 30th? Where's this year going? What were your thoughts on the week overall?
Well, I'm batting 3 for 4. I was very surprised with DC Pride, and I'll give my reasons when we review it. But I was it impressed me. I was expecting just more stories that were boring stories that just happened to have LGBTQ characters. But I was pleasantly surprised that the stories had substance and they had a purpose. Most of them did. And I was actually impressed with it because I was more interested in the story. And I thought that this was a really good story and independent of the sexuality of the characters, which I think Pride, frankly, ironically enough, they focus too much on their orientation as opposed to just telling good stories in the past. But this, I thought, was one of the best Pride compilations that DC's put out yet, and for reasons which I'll go into. And Icon and Hardware, wow. I took a turn a twist on the time travel narrative that I thought was going to be a little tropey, but it surprised me. And Detective Comics I really enjoyed. But Power Girl was a miss for me, and we'll get into it as we discuss it. But overall, I saw 3 out of 4, so I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on you on the Pride thing just a little bit. I mean, I totally get where you're coming from because I think last year compared to the previous year and compared to this year, yeah, I got to say it was a little bit of a down year. And you're right, the stories, I don't know if they focused too much on the orientation of the characters or there just wasn't a lot of substance. But yeah, it didn't, because 2 years ago, it was really good. And the stories felt like they were purposeful. It felt like a celebration of being queer, and they were just really, really good. Last year, for whatever reason, didn't quite all come together. Was it good? It was probably good. Was it great? No. 2 years ago, it was great. This one's bordering on great as well. I don't know.
You have the benefit. You have the benefit of a better memory than me, my friend. I don't remember the one from 2 years ago. So.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. You know, the other thing that I'm basing that on is I remember because I think we did a separate one 2 years ago, and I remember the download numbers went crazy, and people were talking about it for weeks and weeks. And then the one last year, it sort of, I don't want to say it fizzled, but it came and went much quicker. It didn't hang around. People weren't talking about it as much, and I think it just wasn't as impactful. Nothing against the creators. It just, for whatever reason, it didn't come together the way that it had the year before. And this year they're trending back in the right direction. So yeah, I mean, not every story really spoke to me, but there were a lot where I was like, man, I read that. That was really good. Um, Sometimes I struggle with Grant Morrison and his multiversity stuff, but yeah. Anyway, let's get to the creators. It is the first book we're going to talk about. Love's Lightning Heart is the first story. Grant Morrison is the writer. Hayden Sherman is the artist. Marisa Louise on colors. Aditya Bidikar on letters. A Baby Makes Three, which is a story of Harley and Ivy sort of taking a vacation on this deserted desert island, and crash lands there. So that's the three. Baby Makes Three. Leah Williams is the writer. Paulina Ganeshow, Frank Shidovic. I hope I'm saying that right. Shividovic, Cvetkovic, is the letter. Hey Stranger by Nadia Shamas. She's the writer. Bruca Jones is the artist. Tamara Bonvillain is the colorist. And Frank Sidovic, again, is the letterer. Subspace Transmissions by A.L. Kaplan, writer and artist. Aditya Bidikar letters there. Anniversary by Josh Trujillo as the artist. Don Aguillo, probably. It's probably Latin as well, so it's Aguillo. Is the artist. Lucas Gattoni on colors. Lost and Found by Jeremy Holt as the writer. Andrew Drillon as the artist. Gattoni on letters. Teamwork Makes the Dream Work. Mildred Louise as writer and artist. Adriana Mayer on letters. The Dance by Rex Ogle as writer. Steven Sadowski is the artist. Enrica Aaron Angelini on the colors. Ariana Mayer on letters. My Best Bet. Christopher Cantwell is the writer. Skylar Patridge, artist. I think it's Debla Kelly is the colorist. Dearbhla. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. Morgan Martinez is the letterer. And then there's the tribute, as I said, to Rachel Pollack. And then there's a little bit of a preview for an upcoming Dreamer story or series written by Natalie Maines. Rye Hickman is the artist. Rex Glendinning on letters and Rusty Glad on letters. And then there's some pinups. Claire Rowe with Triona Farrell, Babs Tarr, Angel Slorizano, Travis Moore with Tamara Bonvillain, Noah Deo, Maria Lovett, and Brant and Steen on the Youth Center pinup. So overall, yeah, pretty strong. Like we said, the foreword by Phil Jimenez is very heartfelt. The first story is the Grant Morrison story. It's a multiversity story starring this Hank Hallmark character. Flashlight is his name. He's sort of like a Green Lantern analog, but instead of having a ring, he has a torch, as they call it in the UK, or a flashlight, as we call it here in the US. I'm not familiar with any of these characters in the story. In fact, I was like, is this a new character? I had to go look it up. I think I read some of Multiversity, not all of it. This is where that comes from. Earth 23 is mentioned. I think this guy's actually from Earth 36. It was entertaining enough. What impressed me the most was the art by Hayden Sherman. If anybody's seen Hayden Sherman's art in the past, this is by far the most sort of traditionally superheroic his art has ever looked in my mind. Really clean lines, which is not what I'm used to seeing with his work. So I thought the art was fantastic. The color work as well was also really, really good by Marisa Louise. So even though I'm not really familiar with these characters, the sense that I got was this feels like a big world with big ideas, and it's almost like, man, am I coming around to where I want like a Grant Morrison multiversity series where he can really flesh out these ideas? Probably not. And I only say that because of this. While I'm interested and I'm intrigued by all these characters, Grant, he can't help himself, would be pulling in all these other ideas without ever fleshing out the ideas that we already have. That's the problem I always have with his work. He has fantastic ideas, and I'm curious about them and I want to know more, but instead of exploring those ideas, he's constantly introducing new ideas. And even my favorite thing he's ever done, All-Star Superman, the one thing that he's done that I really go back to and read frequently. Yeah, it had all these big ideas of this more powerful Superman. That it just had a lot of big ideas in that story that we never got to explore. And those unanswered questions just bother me. That's the biggest thing I have with problem I have with Morrison's style of writing. But be that as it may, this was enjoyable. It was intriguing. I was pulled into the story. I thought it was pretty good. So, what were your thoughts on it, Rocky?
This was one I have to. There's a couple of ones I gave this competition, but I was a fan of Grant Morrison's Green Lantern run. Now, for those listening, if you enjoyed Grant Morrison's Green Lantern run, you will love this. If you weren't a fan of Green Lantern's run, let's face it, if you're either a fan of Grant Morrison or you're not, I always joke. Well, many people joke that you got to be smoking your favorite recreational drug before you sit down to read Grant Morrison because you'll get a lot more out of it. Now, I never smoked anything while I read this, but I had a lot of fun. This takes place on Earth 36. I love the Grant Morrison is he loves metaphor. He loves dealing with the deep space stuff, the deep philosophical stuff. He makes people think. And this whole thing of the Justice 9 of Earth 36 with this flashlight character who lost the love of his life, who was a Red Racer, who is Justice 9's The Flash, lost him during the original Crisis. At least in this story, in this particular iteration of the multiverse, he ends up having to confront his version of the Guardians in order to find a way to defeat the Inframan, and nothing can defeat the Inframan, and he has to approach this character, Prisoner X, his arch nemesis, Prisoner X, who Prisoner X hates only one person more than this person hates Flashlight, and that is he hates Inframan. And Prisoner X says nothing can defeat Inframan. Inframan fears nothing, and of course it's nothing. The only thing that can defeat Inframan is literally the embodiment of nothing. And so, in true Grant Morrison style, Flashlight has to literally obtain and take control of an unbeast that consumes nothing. Meanwhile, Red Racer is still alive, trapped in the Speed Force, but runs backwards in the Speed Force, pulling back all the multiversal villains and all of history back to the beginning of time. And just when Flashlight shows up, battling the Inframan as the Unbeast, literally as nothing versus nothing, the Unbeast consumes nothingness, and nothing can defeat Inframan, and therefore it's an indestructible force meeting an immovable object, and then the nothing annihilates itself along with all these villains of the multiverse. And a lot of this is said, not obliquely artistically rendered, but the art nonetheless is truly spectacular. The artistic rendering of Inframan is just amazing as Inframan shouts as he's dying. He says, "I'll fight anything but nothing." And unfortunately, the one thing that can defeat him, nothing, is exactly what Inframan has to fight. And of course, he gets destroyed. It's just a cool concept. I love it. And then at the end, Flashlight ends up with the love of his life, ends up rescuing Red Racer, and it's called Love's Lightning Heart. And since it takes place in the heart of a star, it's a love story. It's a Grant Morrison love story told in only the most fantastical, whimsical way that Grant Morrison is such a master at telling. And so, if you're a Morrison fan, this is definitely the tale and one of the highlights of the issue. And this story embodies that. I love this story because it takes the best aspects of the DC multiverse and it weaves a fantastic story. And I love these characters. And they happen to be LGBTQ, and I love these characters. I want to see more of these characters. I want to see more of these characters in R36.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're LGBTQ doesn't really affect the story one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting story, like you said. So the next story is the Crush Harley Ivy story. As I mentioned, with Harley and Ivy vacationing on a deserted desert island, Crush shows up, written by Leah Williams, Paulina Ganusow, artist. I don't really have anything more to say than that. It was entertaining. I felt like Leah Williams, she has the characterization of these characters down really, really well. Probably my favorite moment in the story is when Crush is talking to Ivy about the relationship that she has, because remember, Crush is in a same sex relationship as well, but Crush is much younger. She doesn't have this same sort of experience, life experience, romantic relationship experience. And she talks to Ivy that whole romantic notion. Oh, does she make you feel whole? Does she complete you? Get all Jerry Maguire. And Ivy kind of, throwing some cold water on that, saying, look, you got to get away from the idea that you need somebody to complete you, that you're not a whole person on your own. So I sort of like that. I guess maybe that's Leah Williams' outlook on relationships, but it's a mature way to look at it. And I thought that it rang very true to have somebody who has lived a lot more giving that advice to a younger character. So it worked for me. The Paulina Ganeshow art, I mean, her art is a little bit more on the cartoony side, animated side, but it worked for the story. I thought it was fun. So what are your thoughts?
I enjoyed this story less, but I fully confirm, I agree that the message was really good. The advice given by Poison Ivy to a young Crush is absolutely, it's very good advice. It's very good, and it's good advice for any relationship, regardless of whether it's LGBTQ or not. I mean, the bottom line is you can't help who you love, and don't be ashamed of who you love, and don't be afraid to express it and to show it. And for those of us who read the Crush and Lobo series by Marika Tamaki, this really is sort of, it's almost a de facto fun-loving sequel to that, because it was in that series where we're first introduced to Katie, who is the Crush's love interest, girlfriend. While I'm not a huge fan of the Katie character, I think she's too boring for Crush. That, frankly, ironically enough, is kind of the point. It's none of my damn business who Crush falls in love with. She loves who she loves, and that's kind of a breaking the fourth wall and scolding myself, and so it's a nice message. And I think the story was boring because all it was that it all led to that speech, because it was some fun moments trapped on Dinosaur Island. Crush happens to land on Dinosaur Island where Harley and Ivy happen to be having their love picnic or whatever, and Harley deliberately sabotaging their ship so they can't get off the island, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess it had some moments, but again, good message.
Yeah, 100%. The next story is a story starring Connor Hawke and Tim Drake. Nadia Shamas on script, Baruka Jones on art. This one was just okay for me. I don't really have any context of when Connor was struggling with his identity and his sexuality, because it's referenced a lot in this story. Apparently, Connor and Tim, maybe it happened in the pages of Titans, I'm going to assume, when they were both on the Titans, and they sort of confided in one another. And it's interesting. People wonder, well, Tim Drake, he was heterosexual at the time, but apparently he was struggling as well, but didn't voice it. And there's mention of that here. I mean, obviously he didn't voice it because maybe, DC hadn't decided they wanted to take the character in that direction. But this is sort of an in-continuity explanation for that. And it makes a lot of sense. I think, it's realistic and these characters are and sort of struggling to find themselves. So it just showcases that there's something there between these two, a connection that can be explored more in the future. So it goes to something Rocky was mentioned earlier about how there's more substance to these stories, as opposed to just, hey, here's a story about a queer character, and that's the only point of the story. So many of these stories, like we were talking about the Grant Morrison story, wanting more of Morrison playing in that world. Same thing here, right? Like this is planting seeds and roots for more stories with Tim Drake and Connor Hawke. Like I hadn't thought about it at all until I read this, but we know the Tim Drake series is coming to an end. Man, I'd love to have a team up book come out of that, where it's Tim and Connor out on the road, going on adventures or something like that. I think that would work. I mean, we've had books like that before with the Super Sons, Damian Wayne, and Damian does show up. He's kind of a straight man to these two, no pun intended. But I much rather would have Tim Drake as the Robin in a team book, teaming up with somebody else, than I would Damian, even though Damian's matured and become much less annoying. I thought the art by Baruka Jones was very solid as well. So all in all, a solid story. Again, it feels like there's a lot more to be told with these two characters. So what are your thoughts, Rocky?
This was another story that I thought was, I want to be clear, this was for readers who are struggling with their sexuality or about coming out or whatever, I can see this story, I get resonating with them. But as far as a plot, or as far as it wasn't embedded in an exciting plot, and that's what I prefer. That's why I like the Grant Morrison story so much, because we had a really fun, adventurous plot that was ultimately a love story. Here, this is just a conversation between Connor and Damien, who both happened to come out at the same time, and then they both resented each other for not supporting the other for coming out, and they were just two people that were sort of like quasi apologizing to each other, and just sort of like, just saying, hey, sorry I wasn't there for you. And it was a good, good cool moment between guys who are good friends, and they want to support each other, and they kind of like drop the ball during significant parts of each of their lives. And so in that respect, for fans of these characters, this is a nice sort of it fills that gap in between these two characters, so that they were actually there. Also, I plead ignorance. I actually Googled asexuality straight up. I didn't know that asexual people refer to themselves as aces. There was a particular scene here where Connor Hawke refers to himself as an ace, coming out as ace, and at first I didn't know what that was, and so again, that's asexual people call themselves aces. Okay, that's interesting. And then I read a little bit on it, and it was a little bit educational for me, because I guess I'm not completely familiar with it. And so, hey, that's what these comic books are meant to do, sort of broaden horizons and open up some eyes. And in that respect, I kudos to it, because it was a good character-based story. Again, I wanted a little bit more in the plot, but then I got to be mindful that these Pride anthologies aren't just about the story. A lot of it is about the coming out, and is about the feelings that these LGBTQ characters have. So that's for that reason, it's just another reason why I'm more comfortable with these types of stories, and frankly, I'm maybe a little bit more forgiving when there's not as much plot there.
Yeah, I mean, it's about representation as well, and yeah, these stories may not always resonate with us. There may not be a lot there. This, like Rocky said, the story isn't embedded in some action-packed adventure, but it might speak to somebody else, or the friendship of other people, and might inspire somebody to come out. That's worthwhile, and it's educational, like Rocky said as well. And like I said, it feels like it could be. It feels like again, a team-up book with these two, I think, would work really, really well. Up next, we have Subspace Transmission. A.L. Kaplan on art, story, Circuit Breaker. I know that's a character we've seen before. I can't exactly remember where. She taps into the still force. Also, the Jess Chambers version of the Flash shows up as well. I wasn't the hugest fan of the art style. It's not clean traditional superhero art, and the colors are sort of muted as well. But that being said, this is just a fantastic story. It made me want to learn more about Circuit Breaker. She's a sympathetic character. I was interested in learning more about her. I liked her interaction with Jess Chambers. I liked the Jess Chambers character as well. Even Andy Currie, Aquaman, and Mira's daughter, shows up here. She's clearly still in a relationship with Jess Chambers, so that was fantastic as well. So yeah, this was just, again, another story that felt like there's so much more that can be done with these characters. So yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the characterization that we got for Circuit Breaker. So what are your thoughts?
Well, writer and artist A.L. Kaplan, I thought he did a good job. I actually thought this was a better issue than the story we got in, I think it was Lazarus Planet Dark Fate or something, that introduces the Circuit Breaker. In any event, Circuit Breaker's powers are, I thought, was a little bit undefined, but Circuit Breaker connects to the still force. And one of the things that this establishes is that Circuit Breaker is still learning her powers and how to connect with the still force. And to just get right to the point, just like Flashes have a connection to the Speed Force, Circuit Breaker has a connection to the Still Force. Now, the Flash, Jess Chambers, from the future, from the year 2040, because Andy Currie is old, and if you look at the fine print in the art in the final pages of the story, you know that that the Flash from the future, Jess Chambers, who is non-binary, ends up pulling Circuit Breaker with they into them into the future in 2040. That's why Circuit Breaker meets Andy Currie in the future, and so that was kind of a nice little. It was nice to see that, because it was sort of like a nice call to 5G that never happened, I suppose. But Circuit Breaker is trying to learn how to use the still force, and presumably, just like the Flashes know when they're on a different Earth because of the change in frequency and the vibrations of the Earth feels off, a Flash can tell when they're on a different Earth. Similarly, Circuit Breaker will ultimately understand how to be able to detect that, but by reference to the still force as opposed to the speed force. And so this is sort of a learning curve for Circuit Breaker. And at the same time, you got some good, I thought, some decent character work by A.L. Kaplan here between Jess Chambers and Circuit Breaker. And I thought it was, reasonably well done. The art was, I thought the art was serviceable, but it worked. And I'm curious to see where this goes. I think one of the criticisms I have of Circuit Breaker is nothing against the character. I just have, my criticism is that artistically, I don't know many artists that could make, the still force is such a wishy-washy kind of power. It's not an exciting power for Circuit Breaker to have, because it just slows down flashes, and how do you artistically render that? And it seems kind of boring. And Circuit Breaker talks about seeing things beautiful and things are slowed down, and they try to travel together, but every time Flash tries to go into the past or future, Circuit Breaker's power takes away powers from the Flash, and so it's a little bit wonky. But again, interesting character. The still force is still a power. I think there's a lot of potential there, as long as writers consistently use the same rules when they craft stories around Circuit Breaker, But in any event, not bad.
Following rules, forget about that.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Anniversary, written by Josh Trujillo, art and colors by Dan Aguillo. Man, the art in this is so fantastic, so great. Clearly not the Midnighter and Apollo that we know from our universe, because they're fighting against these characters. I've never seen them. So again, if they've shown up before, I'm not aware of it. But there's Queen Lantern, there's Crime Alley, looks like a Harley analog. Queen Lantern obviously being a Green Lantern. And then Brainiac 69, Mother Box. It's just a lot of fun. And seeing Midnighter and Apollo, Alan Scott showing up to drop some wisdom. I thought it was just fantastic. Probably my favorite art in the entire book. The art just... it blew me away. It was so good. It's digitally painted, just looks gorgeous. I don't know if it's my favorite story. Definitely my favorite art. What do you think of it?
Well, I thought one of the ways that this story really stood out for me is, and a quick synopsis of the story: Midnighter and Apollo. They end up showing it's a queer. It's a parade. It's a protest. It's basically it's a parade that's talking about protecting queers and a gay pride parade, but there's also people that are opposing the parade. And so there's a lot of bigoted and hateful people that want to hurt and are very prejudiced against the LGBTQ community. Well, at one point in the story here, you can imagine Midnighter, some of the people in the crowd, saying some very derogatory things that I won't repeat, but it's actually stated very bluntly, in the narrative, and it's a lot of hurtful stuff has stayed in the dialogue boxes against the queer community. And you can imagine the stupidity. Midnighter is the type of guy that you don't want to piss off. And, Midnighter's sexual orientation, we all know what it is, him being the lover of Apollo. And when they're screaming obscenities in Midnighter's face, and Midnighter is inclined to use violence, and Apollo sort of, there's a great speech by Alan Scott Green Lantern that reminds him of the plight of the gay community with the AIDS epidemic in the late 70s, early 80s, and in how the queer community and LGBT community fought hard, not by using violence, but by refusing to be silenced, by refusing to be, they made themselves known, and that's how they won the day. And so that inspires Midnighter to take over the airwaves on the entire planet, and he renews his vows to Apollo. And the whole world, whether they like it or not, every TV on the planet shows a renewal of vows between two men. And that's Midnighter's way. It's such an authority thing to do. It's like the authority flipping the bird to the world, saying, screw you, you don't accept us, you get to watch us. It's a very aggressive tactic by Midnighter, but it's so something that Midnighter would do. I really, really, I thought it was perfect. It was a perfect way to end the story. And I just want to say something and this is juxtaposed against something that was said in the fantastic foreword that you alluded to by Phil Jiminez at the beginning of this. He talked about, it was very political. He mentioned a lot of political things, Phil Jiminez, in the story. In particular, in the last few years, he mentioned, and I don't know if he has his numbers correct, but it was a pretty high number of something like 400 pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation in various states all across the United States just in the last, whatever, 4 or 5 years. And the battle rages on. And in the midst of all that, he sings the praises of DC Comics since as long as he's been there anyways. In his own personal experience, he praised DC Comics for being at the forefront of the rights of the LGBT community and of doing these types of anthologies. And he also talked about being nonviolent and how do you face such an onslaught of people that want to silence you. And then I couldn't help but think of that because one of the questions that Phil Jiminez poses in his foreword is he often wondered, how would Superman and Wonder Woman react if there was that type of anti-LGBTQ legislation in the DC universe? And of course, that's just a hypothetical question. And let's face it, people are up in the arms about politics and comics to begin with. And so you're not necessarily going to see a lot of that. But you see some of it in this Midnighter and Apollo story, and that's why I love it. It's Midnighter saying, I know how I would handle it in the DC universe. And the way he did that without violence, but yet showing some aggression by probably breaking a few laws of broadcasting laws anyway, by forcing people to watch what they wouldn't necessarily choose to. But I thought it was well done, and the whole story as a whole combined with all the stories here, I thought this was one of the better stories as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, his numbers are all too correct, and I really believe it's a very loud but vocal minority in this country, and really we're talking about people that are far to the right, ultra conservative, and Phil mentions it in his foreword, which is very much worth your time. Highly recommend reading it before you dive into the book. It's something I'll probably go back and reread a few times. He talks about fear, and I think a lot of the prejudice it comes from a place of fear. Nobody likes most of us don't like change. Unless you're in a terrible situation, then obviously you'd like it to change. But yeah, we get comfortable and we're used to the routine, and we like to like, right? Same to same. You can relate to somebody that has the same experiences. It's so much harder to relate to somebody who has a completely different experience, different outlook on life than you. But that doesn't mean they have any less right to live the life they live. And two people of the same sex getting married doesn't affect my life. I'm sorry, it doesn't. And I don't think it affects anybody but those people. So I'm a real sort of live and let live guy, as long as you're not actively harming someone else. I mean, I don't condone murder or, other heinous acts because you're infringing on somebody else's freedoms and life and liberty or whatever. But if two guys want to get married, I don't care. Two guys in Idaho want to get married, I don't care. Two guys in Florida want to get married, I don't care. I don't know them. It doesn't affect my life. So, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's become a huge thing. It's so bad here now. Felt like we made so much progress, and now we're just backsliding. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But hopefully we maintain that, right? As long as we keep taking 2 steps forward and only 1 step back, we'll keep moving forward. And it definitely feels like the younger generation sort of knows better than us. They do give me hope, the young people in this country. And I can only speak for the United States because that's where I live. But yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is a political book. It's going to piss some people off. It always does. But these are fun stories, regardless. Like Rocky said at the very beginning, it's not necessarily shoved in your face every story. These are ATQ stories. This one, Josh Trujillo, he is shoving it in our face because he's telling the story of Midnighter. And this is exactly what Midnighter would do when faced with this situation. Rocky mentions the protest, one side saying they deserve their freedom, the other side saying, they want them dead, basically. They spit on Midnighter, and to Midnighter's credit, he's able to, kind of shrug that off and go, you know what, you're not my type, dude. Apollo's the one that wants to really beat the crap out of him. Alan Scott being the voice of reason. And then, yeah, it's a total middle finger what Midnighter does. He finds a way to stick it to these guys without stooping to their level, without stooping to their, what they're espousing, which is violence against these people. He finds a completely nonviolent way to go, this is the world that exists now, and either get on board or, be miserable. Be miserable with your head in the sand, denying that progress is existing. Like yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Again, fantastic art in that story as well. The next one is by Jeremy Holt, illustrated by Andrew Drillone. It stars Xanthe Zhao, who's the new character. I think she's non-binary, or they're non-binary, I should say. I don't think they're lesbian. I think non-binary, but I'm not 100% sure. But she's.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, starting in the Spirit World series, it just kicked off, 6-issue limited. And I thought this one was really interesting. Batwoman shows up as well. We know that she's a lesbian, so again, keeping with that theme. But what was most interesting to me about this one is the fact that here's a character in Zhao that's she's both living and dead in a way. And that's what's being explored in her Spirit World theory. And so she's struggling with her identity from that perspective. And in a way, that's sort of an analog for her sexuality, possibly. She's non-binary. She doesn't identify as, female or male. She can't really identify, am I alive? Am I dead? Will her story be a story of her figuring out what her sexuality is? Or maybe she'll just decide she doesn't have, a gender identity. She likes men. She likes women. She doesn't need to establish that. That's the way some people are. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, it's such an analog for, most people, at least in our reality, setting aside the DC universe, whether you're alive or not, that's a state. You're either alive or you're dead. There's nothing else. There's no in between. Zhao is in between. Xanthe Zhao is in between. She could be alive. She could be dead. She could be both. She could be neither. Like, we don't know. And that's a fascinating question and something that's really interesting to explore. And then having her interact with Batwoman, who's got, tons of her own baggage, that's so wrapped up in her sexual orientation, right? Like, you can't get away from it with this character of Batwoman, who I've always loved this version of Batwoman. I've always loved Kate Kane. First off, for the incredible design. I want to say it was J.H. Williams that did her design, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But she's absolutely fantastic in her design, that sort of deep red color, the white skin, the black costume. It's fantastic. But again, you can't get away from the fact that she's a lesbian because it is so wrapped up in her origin. That's why she was kicked out of the army. That's why she was estranged from her family. Her tumultuous lesbian relationships, that's not unique to a lesbian, but her relationships have been very tumultuous. And it's sort of defined the character, the trauma that she's been to. So, I think she's a natural for somebody to play off of Zhao. And I really enjoyed the story. I thought Jeremy did a fantastic job. So, what are your thoughts, Rocky? I'm going to look up. I want to be sure that I'm giving credit to whoever created the design artistically for Kate Kane. But give us your thoughts on the story while I do that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's J.H. Williams during his initial I think Greg Rucka was the writer, and J.H. Williams in the backup of Detective Comics back in the day. But
credited creators are Jeff Johns, Grant Morrison, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, Keith Giffen, Ken Lashley. That doesn't sound right to me. Yeah,
But
because this is saying her first appearances in Batwoman Volume 2, Number 1. That's not right either.
no, it's not. But in any event, I'll just interrupt me if you want to add
Yep.
something. Uh, what I like about this is that we not only we once again get just a conversation that leads to a point that the writer wants to make. In this case, writer Andrew Drillin, and that is ultimately Xanthe gives a message to Kathy Kane um, that she helps Batwoman remind her that the importance of genuine self-love in helping to form family bonds even out of a toxic dysfunctional family relationship, because what they're doing is that they end up in a cemetery, and terrorists always or vandals always return to this cemetery to destroy the Kane crypt, the Kane mausoleum, where all the Kane family members are buried. And for some reason, Batwoman, of course, because that's her family, she always goes there and she reveals to Xanthe she's not sure why she always returns there to want to protect this part of the graveyard. And it's because that despite her dysfunctional relationship with her own family, because of her sexuality, she nonetheless has a longing for that feeling of family. And Xanthe just reminds her in a way that is sort of flirts with her a bit by transmogrifying a piece of paper, creating this beautiful green tree symbolizing a family tree. And it was just a wonderful act of friendship for someone that Xanthe just met. And of course, Batwoman couldn't help but comment that I think she's flirting with me at the end. So there is a little bit, perhaps, of nice little. There's an attraction there between the two characters, and it's a nice story, and it's a great way for these two characters to meet, while actually telling us something about Batwoman, and telling us a little about something about Xanthe as well. And for some people that aren't familiar with Xanthe Zhao, the of Spirit World, it even gives you a hint as to what her powers are, and that is transmogrifying essentially pieces of paper and giving them life and transforming them into different images. And in this case, ultimately a family tree, although her main weapon of choice is a giant sword that she wields. But all in all, I thought it was a nice story. And if you're not familiar with either character, this is something that might tip somebody's curiosity.
Yeah, so we all know Batwoman made her debut both as Kate Kane and then as Batwoman in the pages of 52. So yeah, it's correct to credit Jeff Johns and Mark Waid and Greg Rucka, the guys that drew that. Her design, Alex Ross. Alex Ross designed the
Oh,
artistic look for the character,
right on.
based on some redesigns he had for Barbara Gordon that never came to fruition. Made some changes to make her look a little more Batwomanish. So yeah, Alex Ross, like fantastic. Not that Alex Ross needs any credit for being a fantastic artist, but we do want to be sure we're crediting the right person.
Right on.
But I would say give J.H. Williams a lot of credit for for Batwoman's art look as well, because he did have such an influential run on the character in that New 52 Batwoman series. So, all right, up next we have a Natasha Iron story. Io and Nubia show up as well. Teamwork makes the dream work. Mildred Louise story and art. I thought this one was okay. I felt like Nubia acted a little bit out of character right at the beginning. I also wasn't aware um, that Natasha Irons was LGBTQ. So I thought that was interesting to have her show up here. I was like, oh, that makes sense. I mean, that's fine, whatever. She's not really a character that I'm really that much invested in. But for that matter, John Henry Irons I still doesn't interest me that much either. So for me, I didn't really have any connection to these characters, so it was just okay. But one thing I did like is I thought the art was really fantastic. Not necessarily in terms of the style, because it's not really a style. It almost reminded me of like a Disney cartoon in some ways, like Hercules or something, or Emperor's New Groove, which exaggerated anatomy and what have you is not always my favorite. But I'll credit the art with fantastic storytelling, fantastic page layouts. There's especially a double page spread where is in there fighting. So the whole premise of the story is Natasha has created this danger room like program, like X-Men danger room for training, and she's reaching out to different superheroes she knows because she needs somebody to come and field test it. and the only one that responds is Nubia and Io, and that's where Nubia's, I feel like, characterization is a little off, because she's sort of like, what, we don't really need this, but we'll help you out, and I'm sure it's going to be no challenge at all, and what have you. But there's a double page spread of Nubia kind of getting her butt kicked, going up against all these villains. They're classic villains. Obviously, these are virtual reality versions of them, but Bane and Deathstroke and Grail, Mongol, and the layout of that double page spread and seeing Nubia get her butt kicked is just fantastic. So for me, even though the story was just average, maybe a little better than average, the art was fantastic, especially in terms of page layout. So I really enjoyed that. What do you think of it, Rocky?
Well, I do. Mildred Lewis, both story and art. I thought the art actually fit the narrative. I was less impressed with the story, only because, the concept of the story is interesting. I actually really like the idea of Natasha Irons creating a danger room. That's a cool idea. In fact, I love the idea for creating a danger room and working in conjunction with the Amazons to train the Amazons. I actually like that. And one of the things is, and you hinted at it here, and I've gone on these rants before. I've kind of did my bitching and whining about how I think the Amazons could be a little bit more, shall we say, man-friendly, given the fact that they're always preaching about equality. But oh boy, God forbid somebody walks around with a penis and they suddenly flip their lid. Nubia's in a book, in a Pride book, for Nubia to have a comment where she says, "No invention of man will defeat me." Her misandry here is just, again, it's just, there seems to be this idea that Nubia, why is it okay for Nubia to speak in such language when she's the queen of the Amazons? I think this is a horrible, horrible characterization of Nubia that it took me out of the story. It's not enough to save it. It's inexcusable in my mind. It's inexcusable. I don't believe that Amazon should be written like this. I think this is appalling. And there's no excuse for it, and especially in a book that seeks to show that so much work has gone on to show about the LGBT community, about acceptance, about love, about recognition for who you are. To have comment like that, and again, I can be accused of maybe overreacting, but I'm going to stand by it because this is something that we see it in Wonder Woman all the time, and now we see it here again, and somehow it's okay. And it's just, there's no excuse for that type of comments from Nubia. She came across like a total bitch, and there was just there's no excuse for it. And it's just very, very, very bad characterization, and an editor should have caught it. But then, let's face it, the editors know less than the writers do on stuff like this. But beyond that, I love the idea of Natasha utilizing her genius, showing up the Amazons, creating a danger room that can even defeat Nubia. That's really cool. I hope we see more of that in the DC universe.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of seeds being planted in a lot of these stories, like we said before. Next up is The Dance from writer Rex Ogle. Steven Sadowski's art is fantastic. This is basically Catman fighting against a couple of old vigilante villains, Saber and Cannon, who were always fun when they face off against the Adrian Chase vigilante. They're real losers, though. I've never seen them do anything but get their butts kicked. And Catman is sort of holding his own against them, but he is outnumbered 2-1 when who shows up but another member of the LGBT community in the DCU. One of the most formidable fighters that's shown up in recent times, Ghostmaker, shows up, hands off one of his swords to Catman, and they make short work of Saber and Cannon, and then they have their own sort of recreation, their own dance, if you will, in the bedroom after. So fun story in terms of just reminding us how formidable Catman is as a fighter, reminding us once again, Ghostmaker's everywhere these days in the DCU, and gorgeous, gorgeous art. So yeah, it was a quick read, but a fun read. And for me, the art, probably second favorite art of any of the stories in the issue. So what did you think?
Well, there's a lot of potential speculation alerts in this Pride issue. There's a lot of firsts. There's a lot of interesting story elements and Easter eggs that might play fruit in further stories in the DC universe and the dawn of the DCU moving forward. And to my knowledge, is this a speculator alert? Is this going to be the first time that Catman and Ghostmaker get together? Because let's state the obvious. Batman has his Catwoman. Now, Ghostmaker, who's an analog of Batman, naturally has his Catman because Ghostmaker is, I believe he's bisexual. He was portrayed as bisexual in various parts of his own origin and narrative and what have you. So I thought this was actually well done. I thought this. I'm familiar with Catman. One of my favorite series, and I'm not the only one. We love Gail Simone's Secret Six. That's where I really got familiar with Catman. He's an awesome character, and he's an awesome character, and he's also a very aggressive character. And I don't know if it's this is definitely a softer side of Catman. I never pictured Catman as snuggling up to a guy, even though I knew Catman's sexuality. Who I believe is also bisexual. He never struck me as the type of guy that would ask a partner if they want to cuddle. But I mean, who knows? You know, everyone has a different side when it comes to intimacy. But I thought it was interesting, and I think that this is probably going to be a fun. There's going to be, just like you have Midnighter and Apollo. This is an interesting ship. A lot of shippers here might have some fun with this, and it's going to be interesting if. You know, it's funny that we haven't seen Catman make an appearance in Batman Incorporated, or maybe we will now. I mean, wouldn't that be something to rock the boat? Will Ed Brisson bring them on board in Batman Incorporated? That would rock the boat in that series. Although I think it's coming to an end. But anyways, I think this is. I would love to have seen Catman in Batman Incorporated if we don't see him already. But
Yeah, again, Catman, interesting character, a lot of potential for really a B-list character before he showed up in what was it, this the supervillain Secret Six that really kind of put him on the map and made him somewhat of a fan favorite. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out in the future. All right, up next we have a Constantine story along with John Kent, and these aren't characters where first thing I think about with John Kent and with John Constantine, both of them, I don't think about their sexuality. I just think about them as a character. I think, well, you mentioned John Constantine to me, I think, what a dick. You mentioned John Kent. First thing, unfortunately, comes to mind is, man, I wish they hadn't aged him up. I hate to bring it up, but there it is. And then following that is just he's a character who seems to be fulfilling his potential. So that's fantastic. So, having them here telling this story, basically pulling the wool over the eyes of Felix Faust from Christopher Cantwell, I thought was really fun. And showcases the power of John and his ability to sort of go along with this ruse from Constantine, which totally in character, totally something Constantine would do. Basically John pretends that he can't defeat a monster called a fetch that Constantine has summoned, whereas Felix Faust bets that John can. John pretends to lose to the monster so Constantine can gain back the soul of a friend of his that Felix Faust has, so John can release the soul to its eternal rest. And then once Faust loses the bet, turns it over, disappears in a puff of smoke, John Kent talks to Constantine a little bit, then he goes and knocks the head off the monster, the fetch as it's called, with one punch, showing us he could have won at any moment, at any time. He could have defeated this monster, but was willing to take a dive so Constantine could get back the soul of his friend. So a lot of fun. The Skylar art I thought was okay. It's not as clean an art style, or the line work is not as clean as I've seen them do in the past. So I'm not sure about that, but it suited the story really, really well, and it was fun. Fun to see Christopher Cantwell playing in the DC universe. So, what were your thoughts, Rocky?
I actually appreciated the continuity that Christopher Cantwell he built on a story that was in. I had to Google it. Constantine the Hellblazer, Volume 1, Issue 13. He's saving the soul of his friend Oliver, who owns Oliver's Bar, and this was John Constantine. This was a bar that John Constantine routinely visited, and he befriended the bartender named Oliver. Oliver was a divorcee who had children, and he had two daughters, and Olivia's daughters were stolen. Were basically their souls were stolen by Blythe, the demon, and this demon Blythe had the daughters' souls in hell. And Constantine managed to rescue the daughters' souls from hell, but but unbeknownst to John Constantine, Oliver had already sold his soul to Blythe, the demon, in order to save his daughters. And so, unfortunately, it ended like horribly, with Constantine and the two daughters witnessing Oliver's being tortured in hell. And that's kind of how it ended. And so it's really nice to see that it has a happy ending, that at least Constantine doesn't forget, and that this is giving some kind of redemption to Constantine. My one regret here is that we never saw what Constantine was really doing, because we all tend to think that Constantine's an asshole, a jerk. But Constantine doing this, he's setting the soul of his friends free. And it was his fault. Because one of the reasons why John Constantine always regretted entering into a relationship with Oliver in the first place, a sexual relationship, was because people who get close to John Constantine generally tend to get hurt and usually killed. And that's exactly what happened to Oliver, only the worst type of death, literally the loss of your soul and tortured for all eternity. So Constantine managing to do this, and John Kent, that's the only reason that's the story that Constantine would have told John, presumably, and that would have prompted, of course, John Kent's going to help Constantine hearing that story. And so I wish we'd have gotten scenes of that story, because that really gives resonance to the backstory here. Of course, in fairness to Christopher Cantwell, he can't, you only have so many pages in these anthologies, but as someone who barely remembered the story, I did have to go back and Google it again and remind myself. It's a really cool backstory. And as a guy who, I love continuity, I love the respect that Christopher Cantwell did here. I wish more writers did that with these anthologies, because those are the hidden gems that reward readers like us that want to look into the backstory more.
Yeah, 100%. And Christopher Cantwell, he's so one of us in terms of being just a huge comic nerd and a fantastic writer, up and coming. So up next is the tributes to Rachel Pollack, as I mentioned. It doesn't say who writes the little forward here, but there's a couple paragraphs. Again, she was a trans woman, worked in comics, a sci-fi writer, and she was going to have a story actually in this very anthology, but then she got sick and unfortunately passed away. And rather than place her, DC decided, hey, we're going to take the pages that we were going to use for her story, and we're going to turn them over and let her friends tell some remembrances, do a little anecdotal stories here about Rachel and who she was. So kudos to DC for doing that. I mean, it's a who's who of really talented people here. Neil Gaiman has something to say, Trina Robbins, Tom Pyre. So, and they're very heartfelt stories, and it's clear that these people loved Trina and her contribution, or loved Rachel Pollack rather, and her contribution to DC Comics. So the last story, Bad Dream, a Dreamer story, exclusive preview, again written by Natalie. Ry Hickman is the artist. There's not really any dialogue here, so don't know what this is about, other than at the end we're told Nia Now's origin story continues in the YA graphic novel Bad Dream, a Dreamer story, because what we see here is she is sleeping in her bedroom and is having some sort of a nightmare. We know Dreamer is a character, an ancestor of Dream Girl in a lot of ways from Legion of Superheroes. Her dreams are prophetic in a lot of ways. She can't tell the future. And again, this is a character that debuted in the CW universe on television first, and it's been brought over to the mainstream DCU. So can't really say more about her than that, or say much about the story, other than I think the artist that they chose really kind of suits the tone of the story that Nicole Means is trying to tell. Ry Hickman, I don't know if that's a man or a woman, to be honest with you. It's Rye, spelled like the grain, R-Y-E. But yeah, curious to see how that comes together in that YA novel. So anything to add about that, or Rachel Pollack's remembrance there, Rocky?
Well, it was a wonderful tribute to Rachel Pollack. There were many writers that wrote a tribute to her. Also heartfelt. I encourage people to read it. Joe Corallo, Jadzik Axelrod, Elisa Whitney, Trina Robbins, Tom Pyre, and Neil Gaiman all gave tribute. I do want to give a shout out. If you mentioned it, I apologize, but she had a hell of a run on Doom Patrol. She's got an an omnibus that and she came on Doom Patrol after Grant Morrison did. And of course, everyone talks about Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, but what a lot of people don't realize is that the successful Doom Patrol series, the TV series that has gained so much popularity, a lot of the concepts are from her run on the Doom Patrol that followed Grant Morrison. So most people just blindly assume that it was all Morrison. Well, a lot of people know it actually Rachel Pollack had a lot to do with it as well. And it's just very interesting to see all, particularly Neil Gaiman's tribute to her was quite heartfelt, and just as another, not to, I don't want to swear, but F you cancer, F you cancer. I mean, taking too many of us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought up the Doom Patrol thing because, again, you're 100% right. A lot of the concepts that people attribute to Morrison, they don't realize he had already left the book. He'd already left the book. And don't get me wrong, all credit to Morrison. He planted seeds for a lot of things that Rachel bore the fruit of. So, again, I think they're both deserving of a lot of the credit for the success of kind of the quirky, weird Doom Patrol, which is not my favorite version of the team, but it definitely has a place in the DCU, and obviously it's beloved by a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
All right, well, that's the Pride issue overall. I think really, really good. Highly recommend you guys picking it up. Up next, we have Detective Comics number 1072, written by Ram V. Yvonne Reese and Stefano Raphael are the pencilers. Danny Mickey and Stefano Raphael on inks. Brad Anderson and Lee Luffridge do colors. Ariana Mayer on letters. I sort of feel like I'm starting in the middle of this story. Like there's a big bash about to happen. I don't know what the bash is. I don't know what this opening is. It's Oregon Plaza. Was that mentioned that this was coming up in soon? I don't know. This continuity and the pacing of this story hasn't really been my favorite. But it's starting to feel a little bit more like a Batman comic. Although I will say, even once again, Batman shows up less here than a lot of the other characters. We get as much Nightwing and Cassandra Cain Batgirl as we do Batman in this. But it feels like it's starting to come together. And the backup story I thought was very good as well. Dan Waters, Things That Must Die, Part 1. Dan Waters is the writer. Stefano Raphael is the artist. Lee Luffridge on colors. Steve Wands on letters. I felt like this is Things Must Die Part 1, but it definitely plays off of what we saw in the pages of recently with this idea of the Orgum family, and Ra's al Ghul being linked together. This is fleshing that out and giving it a little bit more context. So all in all, one of the better issues of Detective Comics that we've had in a while. I feel like once Ram V's run is all said and done, if I go back and read it, it's going to not necessarily in one sitting because it's way too dense and long to read in one sitting, but within close proximity to each other, not waiting a month, 2 weeks, whatever it is between issues, I'm going to get more out of it. It's going to make more sense. Kind of like a Christopher Priest story in a lot of ways. I don't think it's ever going to be my favorite because, again, as much as I get plenty of Batman and the rest of the DC universe, this is Detective Comics. It is supposed to be starring Batman. And from the beginning, he's felt like a supporting character in his own book. But it's starting to come together. It feels like a lot of these threads and seeds that Ram V has been planting are coming together. And maybe the light at the end of the tunnel feels like the end could be near. And again, it's not that I want it to end because I haven't enjoyed it. More I want it to end so I have the complete story and can go back and kind of read it as a complete story and see if my outlook on it changes at all. So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's a double-edged sword here reading Detective Comics because it's rather odd. It's a situation where the story literally continues every issue. Now, most comics aren't like that. Most comics sort of rehash the same plot points every issue to give you a little bit of a reminder. Ram V here doesn't do the reader any favors. He expects that you've read the previous issues, that you know what's going on. You don't often get too much of a recap. And I don't mind that. I don't mind being challenged as a reader. Granted, I've been challenged reading this quite a bit. It is starting to come together here. Ultimately, this issue just involves the Bat family, Batman, Nightwing, Batgirl, Cassandra Cain, and Oracle, all trying to battle against the Orgums. We got Ten Claw and Fleshcrafter battling Batman. He defeats them. He's underground in the underground subway, the subway network of Gotham City, which is a set of neural pathways that can be set off and given sentience with the reality machine. Batman needs to find the reality machine and ultimately defeat Queen Orgum from basically giving sentience to Gotham. And that's ultimately the Orgum's goal. Now, Prince Orgum at the end is battling Batman and says, look, Batman, I'll give you a choice. If you destroy Orgum Palace, like Orgum Place is this massive tower that's been built, and the people and all the people of Gotham are there for the grand opening in downtown Gotham, celebrating this grand opening of Orgum Place. But the Asmere, there's been people in Gotham who've been kidnapped and taken to subways that Cassandra Cain has discovered have been released somehow. The Asmere they're been mind controlled, and they've turned into these creatures that you can only defeat them with pure cold freezing. And so you got the Asmere wandering around. You've got all these bombs planted around downtown Gotham, and you got Orgum Place. And here we have Prince Arzin at the end telling Batman, "Look, Batman, I tell you what." We'll save the people. We won't set off all the bombs. But but instead, what we'll do is that you can just blow up Orgum Place, destroy this place, and it's sort of like I'm not really sure what the Orgum's end game is here. I know they want to give sentience to Gotham, but the ultimatum of that. When Batman confronts sort of like the Eye of the Serpent, he is attacked by Prince Arzin, who says bombs will go off, but Batman can set off explosives and destroy Orgum Place, which will somehow prevent that from happening. And Orgum Place is exploded at the end, and I don't really know what the point is. I'm not sure why the Orgums want to destroy. Why would they build Orgum Place only to destroy it? Was that all a distraction? I'm not sure. Meanwhile, there's some good character work between Commissioner Gordon and Renee Montoya. Commissioner Montoya and Jim Gordon. Jim is just a retired cop. He's a detective now, I guess. But he gives advice to Commissioner Montoya, and he reminds her, look, he tries to give her information that he got from Batman, but Montoya won't listen to Gordon, and Gordon is disappointed, and you can tell he's kind of pissed off at Montoya, and he says, stop putting politics over what you know is right. Go with your instincts. He goes, I never did. I never put politics over asking the right questions. And that kind of miffed Commissioner Montoya, but it made her think. And so there's some decent character work here. And we got Nightwing and Oracle working together. Nightwing working the crowd, trying to protect them from themselves and taking down some of the Arzin. The people have been converted with that Arzin whatever. And so a lot's been happening here. And and it ends with that explosion of Orgum Palace. This is part 2 of a story arc called The Fall. So is the Batman going to fall only to be resurrected at some point? I don't know. It's another fall of Batman. But this is going somewhere. This is tied up in a very complex, larger narrative that we've discussed before. And wow. So I am intrigued. I'm really curious to see where this is going to go. I don't know when this is going to end, when this actual story is going to end. I don't even know when this story arc is going to end. That's the one thing that I wish Ram V would sort of, he's crafting a very long narrative here. Finally, I'll let you talk about the backup, but I thought the backup was one of the better backups we've gotten by Dan Waters.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about the backup other than what I already mentioned about how it ties into what we learned in a couple of recent issues about the connection between Orgum and Ra's al Ghul, those two that the Orgum family and Ra's al Ghul, and the fact that we see that the family of Orgums, they don't let it go, as it were. They clearly carried this grudge, and we see the beginnings of that in this backup story. So, what I was left thinking, I enjoyed it very much. And I thought, this is adding a lot of context to this feud, for lack of a better word, and I'm sure we'll see it play out a little more, and it explains why the Orgums place so much, or they're so interested in Gotham City and Batman himself. Setting aside the whole retro continuity thing, which I've never liked. sometimes it can work. This time it's not working because, again, so many Batman stories we would have heard of the organs before now. But anyway, setting that aside, um, this adds a lot of context. It's really, really good. I assumed, in fact, it ties in so well with what we have been shown with the Orgum and Ra's al Ghul connection previously, that I assumed that this was written by Ram V himself. And then when I saw it was Dan Waters, I thought, man, Dan he's got to be picking Ram's brain quite a bit. They must have talked a lot about what should be in his backup because, yeah, Dan has a great grasp on that context and that history and what Ram is trying to do with the connection between Orgums and Ra's al Ghul. So,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, I just want to say that what's interesting is that this is about a young Prince Orgum Prince Arzan, who basically, he was actually a really good kid. And when he finds out that his father was killed by Ra's al Ghul, he's still prepared. He still has this, he's more obsessed with this Gaia tree. He's obsessed with protecting this tree than he is about maybe being trained by his bodyguard named Asim. And the Queen Orgum is upset. She wants her son to be more aggressive, more violent, to be more hateful at the fact that her father was killed, even though the Queen herself orchestrated Ra's betrayal and ultimately killing of the prince's father. But the prince is he's almost more of a gardener than a warrior. And but he's very good at what he does. He's very determined, and he even earns the respect of Asim, his bodyguard. But ultimately, at the end, Asim is attacked by Ra's al Ghul's guards, which I don't believe they're Ra's al Ghul's guards. I do think that it's probably the Queen setting it up so that Asim would be killed in order to provoke her son from being more aggressive and becoming more easy to manipulate and to engender and create more hatred within her son. Because one thing about the king, the king sacrificed his life. He wanted to die in the lost city of Urham. And he was a good man. And I think by his nature, I think his son, the prince, was inclined to be a very good man. But due to the manipulation of his mother, the evil Queen Orgum, he's become a hateful and a vengeful man as well. But you see hints of the Prince Arzam meaning well in his communications with Bruce Wayne in the earlier parts of this story, that he could have been a Bruce Wayne. He could have been somebody that was brought up right, but because of his mother, Bruce Wayne had Alfred, but the poor prince had Queen Orgum. And so I like that. I like those seeds that are planted there, that, it's not just genetics, it's environment, right? But I thought it was well done. It made it, a lot of metaphor for a lot of other plot points, and symbolic of what a difference a parent makes.
Yeah, 100%. All right, moving on. Powergirl special number 1, the main story, Dark Night of the Soul, written by Leah Williams. Art is by Marguerite Sauvage. Colors by Sauvage and Maurice Louise. Letter Rebecca Currie. And then there is a backup story that's a preview for the Fire and Ice series, Fire and Ice in Smallville series that's coming up later this year. The DC's already announced. That's written by the same creative team that's doing that Fire and Ice series. So Joanne Starrer does the script, Natasha Bustos on art, Tamra Bonvillain on colors, and Ariana Mayer on letters. This is the one that didn't really do it for you this week, and you haven't really enjoyed this psychic Powergirl. So what are your thoughts?
Well, some beautiful covers. I like every cover. The cover I ordered, which might surprise some people, because who is there anybody who isn't a breast man? I mean, come on, that art germ is fantastic. But I went with the Amanda Connor. I love Amanda Connor's art, so I actually got the one with her with the Powergirl holding up the white albino gorilla there with Streaky the cat in between her legs. And it's not as erotic as it sounds, guys, as it sounds. But in any event, some really great, beautiful, gorgeous covers. And
the Nakayama cover is fantastic as well.
Yeah,
because it has all three of them. I think that's the one I ordered, but I'm looking it up right now. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just beautiful covers, and even the main cover by Marguerite Sauvage is really nice too. They're all very nice, no question about it. And there's even a nice cover. It's probably a ratio variant with that has fire and ice, along with Paige, who's Paige is the name of Power Girl, the new name that she gave herself. And as far as the story itself, this was I just found it largely. I just kind of found it largely boring, to be honest with you. But she finally Power Girl finally confronts Johnny Sorrow, and it starts off in some kudos to Marguerite Sauvage. She's got some beautiful renditions here, where it's almost as if she's Power Girl is trapped in a bunch of almost like cologne commercials starring Johnny Sorrow. It's a series of advertisements, whether it's Sorrow advertising some type of cologne or any kind of crazy world where Johnny Sorrow inserts himself in the mind of Power Girl. Because what Johnny Sorrow has done, he's created psychic delusions that are infecting people, and the more people that are infected, it's like a virus. It sort of exponentially replicates this psychotic delusion, and it infects more and more people, and it's affecting the heroes, and it infects most of the Superman family, such that the only people left to truly fight Johnny Sorrow's psychic spread of these delusions is Power Girl and Omen themselves trying to fight Johnny Sorrow. And in addition to that, Johnny Sorrow, it was a little bit unclear to me. He somehow has allied himself with the Pit, the Pendulum, the Poet, and the Piper, which are all entities that somehow they excite, frighten, entice, and enliven the populace. And I guess that's a bad thing. Although I'm not really sure why, if everyone's asleep anyway, or in some kind of delusional state. I don't know why Johnny Sorrow even needs those other characters, because they're largely redundant. They don't do anything. They don't frankly serve the narrative at all, other than to take up space and give Marguerite Sauvage excuses to draw more of her beautiful art. It's beautiful art. I think narratively, it never really resonated with me. There's far too much talking going on again. I thought it was unnecessary. When you combine all the talking and the dialogue in this issue with all those myriad of, what was it, 3 or 4 issues of Action Comics in the back up there, we didn't need this to be dragged on this long to ultimately get to the entire point of this, that Johnny Sorrow basically felt, for some reason, Power Girl, when the Lazarus Reign hit, somehow activated some sort of psychic power that she had there, where she developed some astral punching ability, and some astral part of her head was activated, and she became psychic. And somehow Johnny Sorrow from Earth 2 has always felt a connection to Power Girl, because for some reason he's felt that they're birds of a feather, basically, that they both are alone, and they feel alone and isolated, and they don't have a direction, and they don't have family. And I could see what writer Lee Williams is trying to establish. She was trying to create a villain that somehow we could relate to and say, oh yeah, that's just like Power Girl, except Johnny Sorrow is nothing like Power Girl. And Lee Williams failed to convey, number one, there was no development of Johnny Sorrow. Number two, I don't relate to Johnny Sorrow. Number three, there was no connection really that I saw between Power Girl and Johnny Sorrow. It wasn't believable for a second. I wasn't even sure if Johnny Sorrow was being truthful. He's an unreliable narrator. Quite frankly, Johnny Sorrow, it would have made more sense if Johnny Sorrow just said, look, you're hot, you got a nice chest, I figure I'd stalk you for a while. That makes more sense to me than this nonsense of him giving a speech that, oh, well, you and I have this connection. Come back to Earth 2 and we'll, I don't know what his master plan was. Come back to Earth 2 and we'll rule over Earth 2 and you could be my girlfriend. I guess that was it. I just thought the thing was silly, to be honest with you, really silly. But at the end, her and Omen managed to, frankly, handily defeat Johnny Sorrow rather easily, I thought. And then Superman shows up and welcomes Power Girl into the Superman family. And Power Girl admits that, she basically always felt lonely, and Superman, well, okay, we'll start new, start fresh. You're now, stop being like that, Paige, Power Girl. And you can come. You're welcome to the Superman family. So hopefully we'll see Paige more in Power Girl more, and somehow she takes Streaky the cat. Kara is the owner of Streaky the cat. Streaky lives with Kara, but Power Girl tells Kara that she's going to take Streaky the cat, and it doesn't seem to bother Kara. Seems like an ignorant thing to do. I mean, I don't like cats, but if I did have a cat and somebody wanted to take it, I might be a little bit pissed off, but Kara doesn't seem to mind. But then we did read that one backup feature with Streaky the cat, and it's kind of a dangerous animal to have around, a Kryptonian cat. I mean, good grief, they cause chaos enough as it is. I don't know if I want one flying around. But in any event, a couple of comments I'm compelled to make here that illustrate and underscore just how disappointed I am with what Lee Williams has done with Power Girl, the lost opportunity here. There's only one page that hinted at what could have been done. And there's a page where it shows that it shows young Power Girl talking about, I was loved once. I was once loved so much that my life was prioritized above all else. I will never feel worthy of that love or sacrifice, never. But I'm realizing now that to freeze or falter in the shadow of that love is the only way to fail their sacrifice. She talked about her parents. She talked about what they gave up. She talked about how she felt when she was young. We got that in 2 pages. More was said there than in the entirety, in my view, of Power Girl. Why didn't you focus on that? I can't help but to be reminded of Tom King's issue 8 of Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. How much he conveyed about who Kara was and what her background was. It was such a powerful issue. And that was in 1 issue. And Leigh Williams has had plenty of time. Now, I'm not drawing an unfair comparison here. She's had as many pages or more than that 1 issue that Tom King had. And this was Kara on Earth too. And if she's felt that way, she's felt that loneliness and that isolation, to go on this diverted path, dealing with John Kent, dealing with Kara, dealing with all this other stuff, and not dealing with her actual background and what she was feeling and what have you. I just think, what a profound missed opportunity here. And I'm just disappointed. And then out of the blue, Catwoman shows up and takes care of one of these, the poet characters. Why does Catwoman show up just out of the blue? It just seemed like I guess Margaret Savage said, can I draw Catwoman? Yeah, draw her on page 27 or 38 or whatever. It just seemed odd. This whole thing, like, don't get me wrong, this is not a bad comic. It's serviceable. It's not bad. I'm reading this and all I see is more of the potential that page has. And I never learned anything interesting about Power Girl as much as I would like. Although we got beautiful art by Margaret Savage. I wish her colors were brighter. I think they're too muted, but her art's fantastic and the style does grow on you. But I can't help but to make the comment artistically that the page that Catwoman was on with that stark black, I think that looks gorgeous. I would have liked to have seen darker colors artistically throughout this, but all in all, mixed feelings. Fantastic art. The narrative I thought was just kind of meh. So what about you?
Yeah, mixed feelings as well. I agree with you about the art. Marguerite Sauvage. I've said before in the past, her art kind of looks like children's storybook art. She's definitely come a long way in terms of her visual storytelling, her transitions from panel to panel. So yeah, the art's fantastic. You're completely right about the colors. It's a watercolor style. It is darker than I've seen her do in the past, but not as dark, especially in the backgrounds. But you're right. Just look at that Catwoman page. You can see what we're talking about. As far as what's been done to Power Girl, I like the voice of Power Girl. I like the self-awareness. I like the growth that Leigh Williams has brought to the character. The things I don't like, I feel like those were probably editorial decisions, Again, I have no proof for that. It's complete speculation on my part. But this idea to give her psychic powers, that might have been Leah, maybe not, don't know. Some of it apparently is going to persist, her ability to punch the astral plane, which is just sort of weird to me. But I don't know that I'm on board with this idea of changing her name to Paige. Like that's just so random and out of the blue to me. But I get it. DC, I mean, I give credit whoever did it, whether it's editor Leigh Williams herself, for trying to shake things up with Power Girl because, yeah, she does feel redundant. A lot of people get her confused with Supergirl, with Kara. She's not Kara. So trying to give her own identity, change her name from Karen to, which is close to Kara, to Paige, like, it makes sense. So I sort of understand it, but at the same time, it's like I liked who Power Girl was. Power Girl's been done well before, Jimmy and Amanda had a great run on her. The I think it was the Huntress and Power Girl Earth 2 book from Paul Levitz that has came out in the last 10 years was fantastic as well. So I think if you'd given the current version of Power Girl a good story, people would have been on board. DC never gave her what she needed in order for her to really land with the fans. And instead of doing that, they're saying, "Oh, there's something something fundamental about the character that doesn't work. So we're going to change her name. We're going to shake up her powers. We're going to shake up her costume a little bit, and hopefully, we'll catch lightning in a bottle." I hope they do, because there is a lot of potential here for the direction that Leah Williams has taken the character. But again, there are other series. You look at that Jimmy and Amanda series like that. They just recently re-released it in a hardcover form, and it's been selling really well. People have been asking for it for a long time. So it shows that the character has potential. DC just haven't done it right. I mean, when you use her the way you used her in One Star Squadron, why would anybody want a character like that? So it doesn't make sense. I did look up the covers that I ordered. I did order the Art Germ cover, and I also ordered the Amanda Conner cover that you ordered. Ratios actually are the one that you have behind you is one of the ratios, and then that one is not a ratio. That's open order. That one is a ratio, and then the Tula Tay where she's kind of reclining back. Those are the ratio covers. So, I ordered two. I ordered Art Germ. I ordered Amanda Conner. I'm probably going to have to pick up that Nakayama cover as well, just because Fire and Ice looks so fantastic. As far as the Fire and Ice story goes, it was okay. I don't really have much to say about it. It's completely set up and explains why Fire and Ice end up in Smallville. It's sort of what you expect. Fire and Ice are trying to avert a natural disaster. They're in Baltimore, so of course Guy Gardner shows up. The characterization, the back and forth between Fire and Ice is what you expect it to be, with them, best friends, best girlfriends, sort of bickering at times. I'm curious what that Fire and Ice in Smallville sort of fish out of water story is going to be like. Also thought the art was really strong, very traditional primary colors as well, which helps to sort of sell the feel of it being very. So I expected it to be pretty funny with this fish out of water sort of feel with these two women in Smallville. I imagine Ice will take to it a little better than Fire. Ice is a little more down to earth. Fire obviously a little more glamorous and used to the celebrity with her modeling gigs and whatnot. So, anything to add about the backup, Rocky?
Well, I guess it's nice, but here's what I find really odd about this. Now, I realize that, first of all, anybody with a brain in their head, if you've been paying attention to DC Comics, or even if you're just curious and you type in Fire and Ice in DC Comics, you got the Human Target popping up. It's been nominated for an Eisner for a reason. The iteration of Fire and Ice, they've been redefined. Now, they've been redefined as femme fatales. As far as I'm concerned, I got a bias. Now I realize that the Human Target, that story is out of continuity. And I get it. But what Tom King did in his portrayal of Fire and Ice was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And frankly, I love this Guy Gardner too. Guy Gardner has always been a better asshole than he is as a normal, good, or functioning human being. And now that's my bias. Now, even if you say, well, wait a minute, if it's out of continuity, we're getting a Fire and Ice series. It can't be the same characterizations. And my response is, why not? I want Fire and Ice. Why can't they be femme fatales? Why can't they be more dangerous in this? This, to me, is exactly what I'm not interested at all. Yet another two bickering women. One's a complete bitch. One's whining, telling her that you don't hang out with Guy again. We've done that before. One thing about Human Target is that Ice was quite capable of handling herself against Guy. And yet here this is retrograde. This is moving backward in these characterization of these characters, and all just for fun. I realize it's just for fun, but this is exactly. I would rather have them not do this. If you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all. Fire and Ice going to Smallville to what? Relax and have a girl chat. Are they going to be like Paige here and Omen, sit around and drink tea for 3 issues, or maybe drink Coke at the local Smallville diner? This honestly, I hope I'm wrong. My prediction: this got boredom written all over it. This was a boring story. This didn't really go anywhere. It wasn't particularly funny. It was very meh, very very meh. And somehow this is getting its own series. Why? And if Fire and Ice have become popular because of Greg Smallwood, because of that series, why are you making a joke out of the characters in this type of iteration? I can't believe they did this. I don't know who the editor is but this is just. I mean, I know you want to give them status, but and a new writer on top of it. I'm astounded by this. I will happily put my foot in my mouth if it ends up being a well-written and funny series. This does not engender a lot of optimism for me, and I hate to say it, and I don't like the art. They should be sexy, they should be hot. Imagine if Fire and Ice, two gorgeous femme fatales, walk into a diner in Smallville. Please have Greg Smallwood draw me that scene. That would be fantastic. That's what I want to see. I realize that's not going to happen, but I don't know how you go from that to this. And think that, oh yeah, this is a great idea. Let's publish this concept. Oh my God. Anyways, I hope I'm wrong. There's a little bit of a rant there. I apologize, but I was disappointed in this backup, and I'm not looking forward to this series. But again, we'll see.
Yeah, I was not expecting that at all. Yeah, I think it's fun. Like, why not? You're asking why? I say why not. JLI was a huge fan favorite. This is the version of the characters we have. If you want to tell a story with ice and fire, femme fatales, you 100% could do that. But it wouldn't be them going to Smallville. That wouldn't work at all. So anyway, moving on. Last book we're going to talk about, Icon versus Hardware, issue number 3, written by Reggie Hudlin and Leon Chills, pencils by Dennis Cowan and Darren Banks, as well as Yasmin Flores Montanez, inks by John Floyd, Banks, and Montanez, colors by Christopher Sotomayor, and letters by Anworld Design. What'd you think of this? You mentioned the whole unexpected time travel going sideways or taking the story in a different direction than we expected.
Yeah, well, first I want to give a shout out to Neil Adams. The homage cover to Neil Adams is awesome, with Hardware standing over the defeated body of Icon. I think that looks really cool. Unfortunately, it's a ratio cover, so I won't be able to get it. My comic retailer never orders any ratio covers because he doesn't have enough customers to justify it, and it's too damn expensive for me to privately order. So, but amazing covers. Now, as for the story. This was a story of Hardware traveling back in time and eliminating slavery. And when you and I reviewed the first issue, this is the third issue. You and I talked earlier when we reviewed the first and second issue that this is kind of going off on a beaten path. We did not expect this. And we were a little bit, this is kind of back to the future-y. Curtis Metcalf, how can he be this stupid? How could he travel back in time? He's got to know you shouldn't mess with time. But nonetheless, he doesn't care. He's going to go and he's going to do it because it's right. And this story starts off with him in the 15th century confronting out of nowhere Vandal Savage, who was of course immortal. Vandal Savage gaining immortality from a piece of meteorite that fell to the earth. Even here, this is Earth 93, Earth 93 being the Milestone universe. It's called 93 because 1993 was the year that the Milestone universe was created, I believe. In any event, this is Earth 93. Curtis Metcalf's traveled back in time to where he's confronted by Vandal Savage, but he defeats Vandal Savage and kills him and discovers that Vandal Savage is immortal, but nonetheless maintains cages Vandal Savage in the 15th century and eliminates slavery in the 15th century. Then all of a sudden, while 400 years goes by, so we have 400 years of Curtis Metcalf controlling and essentially ensuring that there's no World War I, there's no World War II, there's no Holocaust, there's arguably no American Revolution, but there are still wars. But nonetheless, Curtis Metcalf continues to change the history of the planet Earth. Meanwhile, out of the blue, on planet Terminus, in Planet Terminus, there's this organization. There's this group. There's Planet Terminus. There's this governmental space agency called the Cooperative, and it's to the health and prosperity of the Cooperative. They detect a change in hypertime. They can detect that something's wrong with Earth, that somebody on Earth is messing with hypertime, and they send this Arnis character to Earth to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Now, Arnis and the Cooperative they're basically a species, a society that has managed to create a utopia on their planet. And they've done so in a miraculous way. And they're in the Earth 93 universe. They're keeping an eye on the universe, and they know that something's gone wrong on Earth. And they sort of laugh a little bit because Earth is kind of considered primitive, and it's kind of like almost like a natural preserve. It's like, I mean, they're too primitive. How could they be a problem? So they sent Arnis to investigate. Unfortunately, there's also a terrorist organization that sabotages the spaceship that Arnis is on, and it essentially destroys the ship. Arnis manages to escape in an escape pod, but he is retrieved in his escape pod 400 years later by, of all people, we get he is rescued by Curtis Metcalf in the year 1843. Now it's now 1483, not AD. It's 1843 under the United. I think they calls it the United Continent of Africa. So Curtis has created the United Continent of Africa way back in the 15th century. 400 years goes by. It's 1843, and he manages to find the space capsule that this Arnis character is on, and he basically tells Arnis that, look, this is what I did. I changed time. I tried to create a utopia, but I discovered that humans are incapable of obtaining a utopian society because every war that I stopped, there was another war that replaced it. And this Arnis character told him, look, he goes, you can, you have to stop this. And Curtis Metcalf tells him, he says, you know what? You're right. Your future self, tell your future self, I'm going to send you back, but tell your future self that you were right. But even though you were right, don't mess with the past. Don't mess with the timeline.
Right. Thanks, Audrey.
So that's what happens. So Curtis Metcalf basically sends this Arnis character back after telling him that he was right, that he shouldn't have tried to mess with time. But in the meantime, for whatever reason, there is Vandal Savage in the present day, in the normal timeline, that is fighting Rocket. And Icon comes and defeats Vandal Savage in the present. And at the same time as Icon's fighting Vandal Savage, that's precisely when Curtis Metcalf manages to, time begins to collapse in the present day and lead to the events that lead to Curtis Metcalf being sent back to the 15th century. At that exact moment, Brainiac on Earth Prime in the mainstream DC universe detects the change in Earth 93 and detects a threat, and then contacts and transfers his consciousness through the bleed to the Brainiac of Earth 93 to confront Hardware and Icon. I got to tell you, I know I said a lot there, but man, this was a fun read. I had fun with this, and this feels like a miniature Crisis on Infinite Earths, but a miniature little crisis within Earth 93 and Earth Prime. And I just enjoyed the hell out of this. And I don't know how it's going to end, but I enjoyed the hell out of this. And even the art, which was a little wonky here, I nonetheless really enjoyed it. Dennis Cowan on the art and Daryl Banks and Yasmin Flores Montanez. There's a lot of combinations of different artistic styles, which was a little wonky, but I thought it worked, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I'm actually torn because I'm almost tempted to make this my pick of the week because it was such an unexpected surprise.
Yeah, the art styles are all wildly different. Cowan and Banks and Montanez. Banks, a lot of people are going to know, like, why does that name sound familiar? Did a lot of Kyle Rayner Green Lantern, especially when Kyle first showed up with Ron Marz writing. So it was great to see his art back in the pages of DC Comics. Cowan is always great. Montanez is getting better. I'm seeing improvement. So yeah, I do wish they'd picked one or the other. Obviously, it's a big story, so had to divide it up. I felt a bit lost. Like, what is going on here? It's thing I'm reading, but I'm just like, how does this tie in with what we got in the first two issues? And then, when this Arcus or whatever his name is goes to Earth, and then it starts to make sense. Um, yeah, I, sitting in the throne room, and he's like, "I think I'm your god," and he's telling him, you shouldn't play God. That's what my society has has learned. It does not allow, the cooperative does not allow someone to play God. So this Arnis character, very interesting, a lot of potential, just like a lot of the other stories that we've talked about. So how this is all going to play out now that Curtis Metcalf has sort of broken time, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm definitely intrigued. The one little nitpick I had it right from the beginning, right? As soon as Metcalf started messing with time, he's supposed to be a genius. He's supposed to be really smart. People that are really smart don't mess with time. They don't go back and try to change things. It doesn't work out. It never does. Curtis Metcalf, have you never seen an episode of The Twilight Zone or seen a time travel movie or any of that? Ever heard of the butterfly effect? No, man, it doesn't work. And that seems to be what he's learned, right? Even though he's the ruler, he's seen as a god, and tried to create a utopia. He learns it's not possible. It's not possible. So let me go back and try to fix it. And of course, everything goes sideways. You're right, Rocky. Definitely a mini Crisis on Infinite Earth feel. So that does it for the regular issues that we're going to talk about. There are only a couple of collections out this week. The Power of Shazam Book 2. This collects The Power of Shazam issues 13 through 23, as well as some crossovers into Superman, the Man of Tomorrow number 4, Showcase 96, that's Showcase 1996. That's what the 96 indicates. Issue number 7, The Power of Shazam Annual number 1, Superboy Plus number 1, and Supergirl Plus number 1. And then for all you Steel fans, there is a special Steel hardcover celebrating 30 years of Steel. It collects Action Comics number 4, Adventures of Comics 500, Convergence, Superman, Man of Steel number 1 and 2, JLA 17, Justice League Unlimited number 35, Steel 1, Steel 34, a different volume of Steel number 1, Suicide Squad 24, and Superman, the Man of Steel numbers 22, 100, and 122. So those all must be key issues. A lot of fantastic creators that are listed in that in those issues there. I mean, we're talking Grant Morrison and Rags Morales and Brad Walker, John Bogdanov, obviously, Dan Jurgens. So yeah, a lot of really, really great creators. So if you're a fan of Steel, definitely pick that up. So I have a feeling, Rocky, we're probably going to have the same pick of the week, but there's only 4 books to choose from, so it's to be expected, I suppose. So give us your pick this week.
Well, my pick of the week, I want to give, I suppose in fairness, there's at least probably 3 stories in DC Pride that I did really like. So in terms of just, I really liked Icon and Hardware, but I have to be honest, like I have to give Pride some credit because it impressed me. It just plain did. It educated me a little bit, and there were some good stories, particularly the Grant Morrison one. So I'm going to go with Pride as my pick of the week, with Icon and Hardware being a close second. But I got to go with Pride because I actually think there's some bang for your buck there. Even though it's expensive, you're getting a lot of story, and most of them are pretty good and actually have some Easter eggs that will, I think, pay dividends in the DC universe moving forward into Dawn of the DCU.
Yeah, for me, it's not close. I'm going with Pride as well. Everything else was good. Everything else was maybe even really good. I liked all the books this week. DC Pride was great. DC Pride was fantastic. DC Pride, again, just purely on the idea of what potential it has for future stories. I'm intrigued. I want more. I want more of whatever Grant Morrison was doing in his first story. I want more of Connor Hawke and Tim Drake teaming up. I want more of Christopher Cantwell writing Constantine and John Kent. Like, imagine a Christopher Cantwell 6-issue teaming up John Kent and John Constantine. That would be fantastic. That story was fun. So I And not only that, the great foreword by Phil Jiminez, the heartfelt remembrances of Rachel Pollack. There's just a lot to like.
Midnighter, my favorite moment, Midnighter and Apollo getting married and forcing the entire world to watch whether they wanted it or not. I mean,
yeah, that Josh Trujillo story. I'm glad you mentioned that. Probably my favorite story, actually, in the whole book. With gorgeous art. Yeah, just it hit on all the cylinders for me. So kudos to all the creators involved in DC Pride and all the people behind the scenes that put it together. Fantastic, fantastic issue. So. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. We appreciate you joining as always. Don't forget, head over to YouTube, subscribe to Rocky's channel if you don't already. Listen to the audio version all the time. And check us out on YouTube once in a while. Comic Space Boom! Is what you need to search for. You can check out the covers. You can see the art as we're talking about the books. Don't forget, ring the notification bell, subscribe, leave some comments. We really appreciate that. Conversely, if you've stumbled across us on YouTube and you're not subscribed to the Comic Source podcast, go to wherever you get your podcast from, whatever your favorite platform is. So look for the Comic Source, do a search, subscribe, and go back and explore the thousands of episodes we have in our back catalog. So we appreciate the support as always. And until next time, everybody, we'll see you later.
Catch you later.
We'll be right back.